Streaming live from the Paul and Catherine Ranke Memorial Studio, this is TV Free Baltimore. Support for TV Free Baltimore comes from viewers like you. Become a TV Free Baltimore member by visiting patreon.com/TV Free Baltimore.
You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello and welcome to Maryland Politics. I'm your host, Beth Lawson. This evening we have attorney Jennifer Lester. Throughout her professional career, she has been fighting on behalf of others for liberty and justice. She works tirelessly as a community organizer and legal advocate. Her advocacy led to challenging the University System of Maryland in their enforcement of the COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Beth. I'm really happy to be here. I've been an attorney in Maryland since 2004, and I've had my own practice since 2007. And primarily through my legal career, I've represented individuals and businesses on a variety of issues. Recently, when Maryland was shut down in March of 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic, I began to shift my practice to concentrate on issues related to the vaccine.
And there are a plethora of those. Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey into joining the battle against those mandates?
Oh, yes. Okay. So that goes back to March of 2020 when Governor Hogan shut down all businesses that he deemed were not essential. I had a lot of time on my hands. The courts were closed along with other small businesses. And I wondered how one individual, the governor of our state, could have so much power to do this, to change our lives in such a drastic way. So I started to research Maryland's emergency management law. And what I found was quite astonishing, that not only could the governor close down all businesses that he deemed not essential, he could keep this pandemic emergency response ongoing for an indefinite period of time. All he had to do was to reissue an emergency order every 30 days, and there was really no effective way for our government to stop that. So I began to explore that issue, and I got the legislative history to discover how this law was even passed to begin with. And what I found was it was actually passed all the way back in 2002, right after the September 11th attacks. And from there, I kind of delved into other issues related to why every single country on the planet was actually doing the same exact thing as our governor here in Maryland. They were all closing down businesses and restricting individuals' rights to get together with family and friends, to go to church, to do all these things that we've always done and had the rights to do in a free society. We were no longer allowed to do these things. And I delved into why this was happening on a global scale, all in lockstep, all these countries lockstep with each other. And I started to research a larger agenda.
It sounds like a dystopian novel. Can you explain why these conspiracy theories are part of the Great Reset?
Right, okay. Right, it's interesting you bring that up. It is a great reset, and we've heard those words come out of our president's mouth. President Biden has used, similar language in talking about our response as a society to COVID-19. Well, it doesn't take a lot of research to find out exactly what plans are being implemented around the world and in Maryland as well. And the number one place to go to start this journey is a book by Klaus Schwab. and it's called The Great Reset, COVID-19, The Great Reset. It came out in July of 2020, only a few months after the COVID-19 pandemic started with all these restrictions. And in that book, Mr. Schwab, who is the head of the World Economic Forum, he wrote this book about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And this book really focuses on how our countries and our societies need to transition into a new way of organizing ourselves and of doing things. It talks about getting rid of currencies and having one world global digital currency that's not based on any independent sovereign nation's currency standards. It talks about having one world global government under which we will all be participants in. And I thought this was rather interesting and frankly a little terrifying, because when you read through what Mr. Schwab has proposed, and you can go to the World Economic Forum website and all of their plans are laid out, it's very tied in with this revolution in terms of artificial intelligence and what that means in terms of bringing about artificial intelligence into our day-to-day lives, how many of the jobs that we have right now will be replaced with robots. I think everyone's familiar with those ideas. And I just started to draw connections between what was happening politically, what was happening in our economic system, and what was happening in our medical system. And that kind of brought me to the vaccine issue, because I think the vaccines are very much tied in with those world plans by Mr. Schwab and others who are driving this train regarding transforming our lives into this new reality.
That's very interesting and, like you said, very frightening. Can you give us some explanations to your reasoning of how you came to these conclusions?
Well, sure. And again, I mean, this is not coming from myself. This is coming from further research that I did. Once I looked at kind of these overriding concepts of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, artificial intelligence and what that means. And I think your viewers would be very interested to research a man named Yuval Noah Harari. And Mr. Harari is an advisor to Mr. Schwab, and he talks about how there's the scientific reality that we now live in today, where artificial intelligence can be essentially merged with humans. And it sounds really crazy and unbelievable, but Mr. Harari is an expert in this field, and you can listen to what he says about that. And after I did this kind of basic research, I started to look for other individuals and what they had to say, other experts, economists, lawyers, doctors, and professionals that have been involved in kind of the development of our society over the past decade, few decades. And one of the individuals I stumbled upon was Catherine Alston Fitts. Now, Miss Fitts is a very, very accomplished economist. She went to the Wharton School and received her MBA. She was the managing director of Dillon, Read and Company, and she worked for George H.W. Bush as the assistant secretary of HUD. And during her time at HUD, that was in the early 2000s, she uncovered this mismanagement of funds, essentially, by HUD. And she tried to stop what became the housing crisis of 2007-2008 with a whistleblower lawsuit, which she fought for many, many, many years. Well, when COVID occurred, Ms. Fitts, who has her own advisement firm now called Solari Advisors. You can find that on the internet, and she has many, many white papers, or I'm not sure if they call it white papers, but research papers on these different topics. And Ms. Fitts, in a video called Planet Lockdown, very articulately, not as like I'm doing here, but very articulately goes through these plans that the people who kind of make all the decisions about how governments are run, and how is it that we decide that we need to have like a cutback in carbon emissions? Who is driving that train and making those decisions, and why are these decisions being made? Who makes the decisions about pandemic responses? Well, we know, The World Health Organization is very involved in that. And Misfits talks about how the COVID lockdown, how the impact of that in our society really impacted small businesses in this country, and it transferred enormous amounts of wealth from small business owners to corporations and created the situation we're in now.
So you think the COVID restrictions are the vehicle for bringing in and about this global one world government?
Yes, I do. And it's not just the COVID restrictions. You're going to hear the same kind of things with environmental restrictions that are going to be suggested, that are implemented in terms of like we all should be driving electric cars. Or in England, I know they just passed some rule which prohibits individuals from driving on Sundays because there's a problem with the availability of gas due to the war in the Ukraine. So all of these things kind of come together to present this picture that what's really happening is not what we're being told, or the purpose is not really what we're being told. And my understanding of what the grand plan is to create a one world currency that's based on a digital ID, much like China already has in place, where everything you do is monitored and surveilled through your computer, through your smartphone. Everywhere you go is tracked through the computers in your car. I mean, much of these systems are in place today. And the vaccine and the health response that we see is kind of used to like create kind of a ruse, like a smoke and mirrors kind of object. So you look one way and you think it's a public health issue, but what's really going on is our governments and corporations are laying this framework to tell us, well, look, unfortunately, because all the businesses had to close because of COVID, everyone's now bankrupt, and we're going to have to reset the economy. And that means nobody has access to cash anymore. We're all going to be reissued these digital certificates so that we can have a new currency, and that new currency, your amount that you're allowed to have is based on your cooperation with this system. Are you wearing your mask when you go out? Do you have your vaccination, all of your vaccinations up to date? And if you are not in compliance with this, then your digital account automatically gets hit with a fine, and all of a sudden you don't have enough digital currency to drive your car that day. This is the kind of system of control that's going to be implemented across this planet if we don't take individual actions to stop it, like filing a lawsuit, challenging vaccine mandates, or electing better representatives to our public offices.
I agree with that. It's a big struggle right now with who to vote for and knowing the backgrounds of the different people. Do you think that society has been brainwashed?
I perceive many individuals in society as being, unfortunately fooled. You could say brainwashed. I think that's a really a sad, strong term. I think it's really important that people stop watching the mainstream news channels. There's serious problems with funding of the news sources. If you start digging and doing some research, you'll find that pharmaceutical companies actually fund most of the major television networks. And so the news that you're getting is heavily censored to reflect the economic interests of the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, that's not, a conspiracy theory. That's actually very real and very easy to find supporting information for that. In fact, just turn on your TV and I think every commercial you see has to do with like some drug you can buy from, Pfizer or whoever, and, why you should get this vaccine or that vaccine for this issue or that issue. I mean, it's pretty clear that the funding for our news source is driven by large corporate interests, and that is definitely going to sway the content of the news and perspective of the news that you get. You're not going to get the whole story, and you're certainly not going to get any story that maybe is really important for you to explore. For example, another individual I would look to for kind of perspective was Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, talks about, the financial motives that Mr. Fauci had in his time working for the NIH. And this book, really lays out what has gone on with pharmaceutical companies and our government over the past 20 or 30 years. So these types of sources really lead someone to start putting together a better picture of what is really going on with our world, and it's not what we're being told.
It is very important that we learn to advocate for ourselves and do our own research rather than just rely on possible propaganda that's fed to us. Do you have any other suggestions of books to read or authors or educated professionals to follow?
Oh, sure. There's another woman I think I certainly learned a great deal from. Her name is Rosa Koire. And Rosa Koire passed away last year at the end of the year. And she was actually a commercial real estate appraiser and worked largely on the West Coast. And she's very familiar with property in California and Oregon and all on that area. And Miss Koire had noticed during her career that there were a lot of changes and laws being implemented which drastically affected people's property values, especially individuals who wanted to develop their property in certain ways. And I'm actually familiar with a lot of those laws as well. I have a master's degree in community planning, and I worked for a while in environmental regulation field. And what was very interesting to me with Ms. Koire is she had delved very much into these environmental programs, worldwide environmental agendas. There's Agenda 21, there's Agenda 2030, and you can look these up. They're very readily available on the internet. And Ms. Koire read through these, and she realized that the goal was much like what I've already been talking about with transitioning our society into this one world economy, one world political system, that the goal through these environmental programs was really to take away our private property rights so that nobody owned any private property, and we were forced to live in communal settings, and that would very much limit our individual freedoms. And, this is really important for individuals, especially in this country, to understand, because our country is founded on individual rights. It's founded on land property rights that other countries just don't have. And unfortunately, since COVID restrictions rolled out across the world in March 2020, we've seen an erosion of people's rights in many, many countries. Australia, Europe, and Canada most recently. In Canada, for example, there was a truckers' rally, and all these truckers got together and traveled across the country and set up camp in Ottawa. And the Prime Minister, Trudeau, locked down the bank accounts, froze the bank accounts of any individual Canadian who had given $25 or more towards this truckers' rally. So you can imagine, you're sitting at home, you're a single mom maybe, and you see news about this truckers' rally, you donate $25, and next week you go to buy groceries and you can't because your bank account is frozen because Mr. Trudeau decided that you were not entitled to exercise your right as an individual to give money to a cause that you believe in. So I think people need to understand that, if that kind of thing is happening to Canada, which is very similar to our own country, it can easily happen here. And certainly if we had a digital economy, that would be a routine occurrence, as we see in countries like China that have already implemented a lot of this.
That sounds incredibly restrictive and overbearing. Can you tell us some examples of how to fight back? Like, for instance, some of the lawsuits that you've been involved with?
Well, yeah, this brings me to individuals fighting back. I represent a lot of individuals who are seeking exemptions to the COVID vaccine mandates. We have very strong constitutional principles in this country that is supported by a long line of legal precedent, which provide that us as individuals, each individual has a right to something called bodily autonomy. And that right is given to us from a creator. It's not given to us by man. It's given to us by virtue of us being born as humans. And, if anybody should not be forced to take a vaccine that they do not want to take. And so it's very crucial for individuals that do not want to get vaccinated, but who are being asked to get vaccinated by their employer or their school to stand up to this. If everybody stands up, if everybody fights back, who doesn't want these things, then it's going to be impossible to bring about these changes, because there's so many more of us than there are of the individuals that want to make these drastic changes in our lives. So I help individuals we don't always file a lawsuit. We often start out with letters, or I help individuals write their own statements to submit. A lot of times those are accepted. In a few cases, I've filed different types of litigation to overcome an institution's reluctance to accept a medical or religious exemption.
And something else that is very concerning is where these COVID mandates can lead. Like, for instance, could them mandating a shot, for instance, like that, eventually come to say, oh, gee, your blood type matches my other elite friend's blood type, that my elite friend needs a kidney. You're a match. Give me your kidney. Is that a remote possibility in the future if this continues and people don't file lawsuits?
Well, first also, I just want to say, in terms of filing lawsuits, they're not always the most effective way. They're one aspect of a strategy. So the second part of that I want to point out is what we've seen going on across the country, and that's, people getting involved in politics and local politics at their school boards, at the county council level, and making sure that individuals get elected who support the core values of our country. Now, to answer your question about organ harvesting, I would just say that, it's really important. The reason I brought up this individual, Noah Harari, is because he talks about something called transhumanism. And, the individuals making these decisions that we don't really know who they are. We just know there's these large international institutions that are kind of driving policy. Mr. Harari, is an advisor to them, and you can listen to him talk about transhumanism. And when you hear this, you begin to realize that individuals who are transhumanist, they want to kind of edit or create humans in a way that merges them with artificial intelligence, because they believe they can create a more perfect human. And they don't perceive individuals like you and me and your audience members as free human beings who are here by the virtue of just being a human born into this world. They see us as commodities, as no better than maybe a cow. And how is livestock treated? I mean, livestock is treated as a means to an end. We grow the livestock to produce food. Well, I would venture to say that a lot of these transhumanists see humans as being grown to provide, some material resource for their agenda. I mean, with robots being developed at the rate they're being developed, being able to take over many, many jobs that have been done by humans, you have to ask yourself, well, what place, does the economy have for humans when you can have robots do the job of, even a surgeon? I mean, there's heart surgeries that are done with robots now. And that leads you to wonder, where's the value in humans? And I think that, that's really important for us to find out exactly what the objectives are of this larger groups that are kind of driving policy, and make sure that human beings remain valued as individuals that were put here by a creator or by some entity that is higher than man, and therefore man cannot dictate, what happens to us as individuals and to our individual body, because it doesn't belong to them. It belongs to us.
I can't imagine that filing these lawsuits and having them manifest and being heard by the courts has been an easy battle. Can you tell us about some of the obstacles that you faced?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy battle filing the lawsuit against the University of Maryland. I mean, first of all, there's you're up against a huge government entity, and that requires a great deal of financing. The attorneys representing the government are paid for. They have like an unlimited budget. Their war chest is huge, and ours is small. So, and then also it's hard because a lot of times those cases get stalled. Decisions aren't made. They just kind of, there's a motions to dismiss pending in our case, and there's no decision there yet. There's other litigation going on across the country. Many of those cases were outright dismissed. Other of those cases have gone forward, and I think they are making a difference. You're seeing very positive rulings in cases involving our service members. You're seeing positive movement in cases challenging the government's non-response to Freedom of Information Act requests. Many individuals are familiar with the Pfizer documents that are being released about the vaccine approval process and what documents were submitted by Pfizer to get their approval from the FDA. The FDA lawyers argued to the judge to wait 75 years to release those documents. And a judge out of Texas said, no, you're going to release these documents over the course of the next 9 months. And every month there's going to be 55,000 documents released until August. And from the first set, at March 1st that was released, we saw approximately 38 pages outlining adverse effects that Pfizer found during their vaccine studies for their COVID vaccine. So, I think that was a very, very positive outcome, and individuals need to look to that. They need to take those documents that have been released that outline the COVID-19 adverse events and give those documents to their government officials, give those documents to their elected officials, put them on notice that you are trying to mandate a vaccine that has been demonstrated by the pharmaceutical company to have pages and pages and pages of adverse impacts. Give them a copy of the VAERS reports that show, millions of incidents of adverse reactions logged into the system. These two documents demonstrate that this vaccine is neither safe nor effective, and certainly should not be mandated by our government.
I could not agree more. And could you explain to our audience why our Bill of Rights is so important?
Sure. So, like I said before, a little bit earlier, our Bill of Rights and our Constitution are really important because these documents guarantee our individual rights, and not the individual rights that man gave us, but our Declaration of Independence very specifically says that our individual rights were endowed upon us by our Creator. And these rights are inalienable, which means they cannot be taken away. They are intrinsic to us as a human being. Our rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, are declared to be our rights, and that is the basis of all the other documents which form our government. And we're seeing these rights being taken away. The First Amendment guarantees our right to freedom of religion, freedom of speech. If you are being required to take a vaccine which fundamentally alters the body that was created by a God that you believe in, that's a violation of your freedom of religion. We can see freedom of speech being violated all over the place. I mean, the censorship on these private, Facebook and other entities is the way that we communicate in our society today, and that is being heavily censored. The government we just had reports come out that the government actually paid news broadcasters, major news broadcasters, money to keep quiet about any issues related to the COVID vaccines and to only report positively on the COVID vaccines. I mean, you just have to look for the information and you can find it. I would suggest people turn to, BitChute and other alternative platforms to seek out information that is relevant and uncensored and will help them protect their rights. Knowledge is power, and the truth is the first casualty of war. And really, we are in a war right now. It's not just a war at the Ukraine, it's a war here in our country, and that's a war to keep our rights as individuals, to direct the momentum of our lives and to control what happens to our bodies.
Agreed. Do you think that the reason for the recent success of Maryland getting rid of the mask mandates, do you think that has to do with people standing up?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I don't think that that mask mandate would have been lifted without political pressure from the citizens. I know there's been a massive movement for months and months and months of parents to lift the mask mandates in schools. They finally got together, raised a fair bit of money to hire an attorney, and filed a lawsuit. And then next day or two after that happened, Governor Hogan lifted the mask mandate, asked the school systems to all lift their mask mandates, and one by one, we've seen that happen. And that never, ever, ever would have happened without political pressure. And that's what we all need to remember. And we have to keep that political pressure up. We have to be well informed. We have to make sure we inform ourselves with alternative sources. And we need to actively pursue letting our elected officials know where we stand, what we want in our lives, and standing up to institutions that tell us we have to do something, particularly with our bodies, that we don't want to do. If you go into a store and they tell you to wear a mask, say no. And if they don't accept no for an answer, go shop somewhere else. If like I said, if your employer is telling you to get vaccinated, tell them no. You demand to submit a religious exemption request. That's your right. Under the First Amendment, that's your right, according to EEOC guidance documents on protecting individuals' rights to religion, exercise of religion in their place of employment.
We've seen huge battles already with the COVID restrictions. Do you think there are a lot more in our future, for instance, with the vaccine passport?
Oh, yes, there is a big battle ahead, and you have to really pay attention. When you're not hearing about something in the news, it usually means something is happening. So I know right now the news is really focused on the Ukraine, but what's happening behind the scenes is across the country, state by state, they're trying, the different legislative bodies are trying to pass these, either, they don't call it a vaccine passport, they're called now digital IDs. And it's essentially the same thing. It's requiring you to log into a computer or a smartphone and upload information, confidential information, private information, usually medical information, to verify your identity. And they're going to, our government, large government, wants to use this as a way to implement this worldwide digital currency. They're not going to do it and come out and tell you what they're doing. They're going to do it in a way that is under the guise of something else and quietly. So people really need to monitor those laws and pay attention. Don't use your smartphones. When you go to a restaurant and they want you to use your QR thing to scan the menu, don't do that. Demand to see a paper menu. That is what is leading us. Those individual actions help lead us into this transition that is so dangerous for all of us.
Jennifer, what you've said sounds terrifying. Can you give us some further tips on how we can continue to fight to preserve our individual freedoms?
Sure. In addition to what I've already talked about this evening, it's really, really important for everyone to understand that what I'm talking about is not some future scenario. It's actually happening now. The systems are in place to implement a lot of what I've talked about. In particular, Maryland's Emergency Management Act. Everyone can go look that up. It was passed in 2002. I actually have a 3-hour presentation on that law that I gave to a group a year ago. If anybody wants that, they can get a hold of me and I'll do that for their group. But what people need to understand is this law gives the governor immense power, and the governor can then transfer that power to the Secretary of Health. There does not have to be any real basis for the governor to declare a state of emergency. It's based on the governor's belief. You want to make sure that you have in that position someone that you trust not to abuse that power. The law needs to be changed. This law can have you and your children can be forcibly removed from your home if a state of emergency is declared on the basis of a pandemic. If you refuse to be tested, treated, or vaccinated, the public health official, under the direction of the Secretary of Health, can forcibly remove you from your home and place you in a state quarantine center for 30 days. And that order can be renewed for ongoing 30-day periods so long as the state of emergency is in effect. You would have the right to challenge that quarantine in court, but you do not have the right to be present in court when that order is being challenged, and the court may postpone hearing that case if the state of emergency is so large that they can't handle, the resources aren't available to hear your case. So listen, this kind of thing is already happening in China, okay? They are quarantining individuals in China. They are removing people from their homes and putting them in COVID camps. This can happen in this country. The laws are there on the books to allow this to happen. We need to have this law repealed. We need to have a different legislative officials put in office. We can all work as individuals to make that happen, who have our interests at heart, who want to protect our government, our Constitution, and who are not beholden to other outside influences that want to bring about this drastic change into our life and the way that we live. So that's definitely what individuals can do. They need to speak up loud, talk to everyone they know about what's happening, research what's going on, make yourself well informed, and fight back. Do not sit back and let this narrative unfold, because 2 or 3 years from now, it may not be possible to change things.
Thank you so much. You have given us some fascinating and horribly frightening things to consider. We appreciate it very much, and thank you again for speaking with us this evening. Thank you for watching Maryland Politics. Please like and subscribe to TV Free Baltimore. I'm your host, Beth Lawson. Stay well, and please tune in for Maryland Politics on our next show.
You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore.